Hey fam, welcome back. Atisha here, back for another chapter reading of Stolen Innocence by Elisa Wall with Lisa Pulitzer. Go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button as we jump into chapter 12. I am anticipating that this is going to be a hard reading, so I already have the thumbnail warning up. I just got this feeling. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Hit the like button. Chapter 12, the title alone has my stomach in knots. Man and wife. There's no force in this celestial law. The prophet doesn't force you to heaven. And when you enter into marriage, you never have the right to think you have been forced into the situation. You know better. Even my saying it to you, you know it will be your choice when you say, I do or yes to the prophet. That is by Warren Jeffs. It's just yet another way of them trying to make it seem like these ladies have a choice in the matter when clearly they don't feel that way. The flowered clock on the wall read 4:30 a.m. as I stood in front of the mirror in mom's room, blankly looking at my reflection. The face that stared back was foreign to me. In a place of the young, spirited 14-year-old, there stood an empty looking body with eyes that were swollen and irritated from hours of crying. So, this is what death is like, I whispered to myself. I barely flinched as mom straightened my shoulders, which were rounded and heavy from the burden of the past week. She was trying to correct my posture so that my sister Cassandra could get an accurate measurement for the hem of my wedding dress. The night had been long and exhausting. After my terrible first date with Alan, I had escaped to the comfort of my own room where my mother had found me. I had sensed her hesitation even before she uttered a word. Lisi, maybe this is the right thing to do, she gently prodded. This must be the will of God and the prophet. Mom, I just can't do this, I replied in desperation. Everyone expects you to, stated matter of factly. She had watched as I'd gone back and forth between Uncle Fred and Uncle Warren in my attempts to halt the marriage or at least gain more time, but time and again she found me crying in our room, frustrated over my inability to to convince the powers that be that this was not my time. You have to do this, Mom admitted. You have no other choice. That's what it boils down to. She doesn't have a choice. She does have a choice, but she doesn't know that she has a choice because of the way that they are brought up. It was hard hearing those words from her. Her support from the previous week seemed to evaporate that night, and suddenly I felt hurt that she was giving in. I didn't understand what had caused the shift, and I was crushed to have the most important person in my life surrendering to Uncles Warren and Fred. At that moment, I felt angry at the whole world. What I didn't know then was that mom had been secretly pulled aside and told that it was her responsibility to make sure that the marriage took place as the prophet had directed. She'd been instructed to make it happen or else. Once again, it's not a choice. They love saying it is, but they're not. It's just a system built on lies. So many people find it difficult to understand why I am no longer angry with my mother. It is hard for outsiders to comprehend the mindset that came with our culture. It's true. It is because I struggle with it too. We were taught that the priesthood and the prophet come before anything else, and mom had already been forced to make this choice with 6 of her own children. It's hard to explain why she didn't just pack me up and take me away, but in her mind, making that step would have damned us both. She was already a part of God's chosen people, and she didn't want to give up the utopia she believed she was already in. Sad thing is, her mom still believes this. When I'm hearing this, that's what keeps going through my mind. To her, the outside world was like stepping into hell, and nothing was worth trading that for, because Fred and Warren were holding her accountable. If I failed to follow through with the marriage, I would not only condemn myself, I would condemn her too. It makes absolutely no sense that me making it to some kingdom is based on somebody else. It makes absolutely no sense. Meaning, if somebody else goes and commits some type of awful crime, then that falls on me too. I just can't wrap my mind around this. I get it. It's a cult, all those things. It's just still hard for me sometimes to comprehend. Not only would she be risking eternal life, she would also be forced to choose a loss of home and community and a relationship with the older and younger daughters she still had in the FLDS, because they take these people's kids from them. As such, her feelings were rooted in a concern not just for my salvation, but for her own and for the safety of her two youngest daughters. Like so many FLDS members, Mom was a true follower. She'd been taught to strictly conform to the priesthood, knowing the strength of my mother's belief. I guess it never crossed her mind to question whether this church, this life was right if it forced her 14-year-old daughter into marriage. If she did question that, she would have to face many other decisions she had made in her painful past. Even then, I knew she had no real choice. The church was her home. It was all she'd ever known, and she, like thousands of others, couldn't leave or risk giving up her and her children's place among the faithful. Ultimately, while it hurt to have her join the chorus of voices pushing me, I knew Fred and Warren were behind it. When I heard her say those words, it was as though they themselves were speaking. They were simply using her to get to me, and I knew that I had no choice but to listen to them. I sat on Mom's bed for hours that night, silently watching as she and Cassandra hurriedly designed and pieced together the wedding dress. That is true. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said who they thought Cassandra was, and it does seem like Cassandra is Rebecca. Mom had given up on getting the fabric at the store downtown and had finally purchased some material at a small shop in Hilldale. Perhaps she too had put off the inevitable in hopes of a miracle reprieve, but here we were, just hours away from the actual ceremony and rushing to make an acceptable dress. How do you want the dress? Cassandra asked, trying hard to elicit some input from me. I don't care, I told my sister. Just make it simple. I didn't want anything fancy. There was nothing fanciful about what lay ahead for me. Elisa, I need you to hold still or I'm going to poke you with the pins, Cassandra announced as sobs racked my body. These were tears of desperation, and I could do nothing to keep them dammed up. When the night of hurried preparations was over, the wedding day arrived. Dressed in a wedding gown with my hair done, I sat on my mother's bed, totally exhausted. The emotional toll that this is taking on her body, my goodness, my goodness. I know how hard it is for you, but I want you to feel beautiful, Cassandra said, placing a small box in my hands. Through the clear plastic top, I could see a delicate tiara like the ones we admired during past shopping trips to St. George. Over the months that Cassandra and I had been together, we spent countless hours in prom dress shops, fawning over fancy gowns we knew we could never wear, and dreaming up elaborate scenarios we knew would never happen as we tried on sparkly tiaras. Now my sister was giving me this beautiful representation of our shared fantasy. But while I loved the thought behind it, it only emphasized how far I was from my daydreams. My sister and mother served as crutches, one on each side, as I descended the stairs of the Fred Jessup's home. When I got downstairs, though, they sent me back up to change into an everyday dress so as not to attract attention to what we were about to do. Because you don't want to let everybody know that this 14-year-old is about to get married, or because because at this point, everybody's already knows, everybody's already seen it. Everybody saw Fred as he told that young man to go sit next to him, and them as they walked all throughout the town on this so-called date, knowing that it would bring attention. So why are we trying to hide things now? Mom could barely steady me as I clutched her hand tightly, and we stepped out to meet our waiting vehicles. 3 vehicles were lined up in front of Uncle Fred's house that morning. Instinctively, I followed Mom into the back seat of Uncle Fred's big Chevy Suburban and numbly fastened my seatbelt when someone yelled out to me, "No, Elisa, you're riding with Alan." I was crushed. She couldn't even have the last moments of freedom to herself. I couldn't imagine driving with him as his family. All along, my mother had been by my side as my anchor, and I needed her desperately. This would be my fate for the rest of my life, wanting the comfort of home, but being forced to be with a stranger. In an attempt at chivalry, Alan tried to carry my bag, but I was rude to him, even in front of his parents. I knew my behavior was inappropriate and mean, but I didn't know how to act. I wanted to keep sweet and be happy, but something in me just knew this was all wrong. Nothing had prepared me for the huge step I was being asked to take, and I was a child in pain, lashing out in the only way I knew how. It probably wasn't easy for Alan either. I'd done little to hide my loathing for him. He too was being robbed of his perfect wedding, and neither of us had any power to halt the train. I never thought about him not having power either, but I don't feel sorry for him knowing what he did. I don't. I don't, because he's the man. So you could have gotten married to her and not harmed her, but we know based on other books that that's not what happened. After the 3 cars carrying the wedding party left Uncle Fred's home, we briefly stopped at Uncle Rulon's compound in Hilldale, where several cars joined our caravan heading out of town. We followed closely behind the vehicle, carrying Uncle Warren and his father. My sister Rachel and a few of Uncle Rulon's other wives were there with them. They had been asked to accompany their husbands to tend to his ongoing needs. I'm so confused about I keep getting confused about who Rebecca is. Anyways, sitting in the passenger seat next to Alan that morning, I felt like we were on the road for hours and hours, even though it was only a few. Not wanting to even look at Alan, I stared at the car that contained Lily and Nancy. Mom and the other mothers of the other girls getting married that day were in Uncle Fred's Suburban. We were supposed to consider ourselves lucky that Uncle Warren had allowed all of the brides' mothers to come along. With the recent scrutiny from law enforcement, many of the brides were forbidden to have even one family member present at the union, and usually it was only the father. As we rode alongside the interstate, I took in the open expanses of the Utah horizon. Here's the thing, those women aren't there to make them feel any better. Those women are there because it doesn't look as bad if you have these older women there versus these little girls. That's my thought on it. Tell me yours. It should have dawned on me that many aspects of the religion were based on revoking the rights of women. If a girl speaks her mind, get her married. Once she's married, get her pregnant. Once she has children, she's in for life. It's almost impossible for any FLDS woman to take her children if she leaves, and and no mother wants to leave her children behind. It's just like they found ways around so many laws for so long, and even with everything that's gone on, they're still finding ways around it. I just don't understand this. At the time, I was still too young and blind to see the pattern. All I could think was that this land and these people were my home. But for me, and for most FLDS women, there is an unspoken yet enormous sense of entrapment. On the one hand, the landscape seemed to never end. On the other, all I could see were the walls closing in around me. I wondered what Nancy and Lily were thinking. Lily seemed to be keeping sweet. From what I could tell, Nancy was playing on the role of the ideal FLDS bride, relishing every moment since the announcement was made. She saw it not as a sentence, but as the beginning of our true path to heaven, our path by our husband's side. As I looked at their car, I was furious with myself for not being able to enjoy this occasion. Carrying out the prophet's will was supposed to fill my heart with the love of God. My stepsisters looked happy, and I, in turn, felt robbed of the joy I had always planned to have on my wedding day. Although I didn't know it when we set out, the plan was to drive to Caliente, Nevada, just across the state line. One of the FLDS men, Merle Jessup, owned a motel there. In the past, weddings had been performed more in the open, at least by FLDS standards, either at the Prophet's compound in Salt Lake City or at his compound in Hilldale, with friends and family allowed to attend. But by this time, all underage marriages occurred in secret. The fact that it's in secret should let you know it's wrong, but they, of course, do not know this. The young girls were driven to remote locations outside of the jurisdiction of Utah and Arizona. In order to evade the law, we went to Nevada where the laws were not so strict. There was to be no proof of the ceremony, no unnecessary witness, and absolutely no photographs or paperwork. In the past, the tradition was to obtain a state approval marriage license when they were legally possible, with Rulin and Warren's frequent predictions that the end of the world was coming any day. There was no need. It's just like the marriages that they had, even the first ones weren't legal in some of these instances when you're hearing all of this. They don't even have paperwork. They're just doing whatever they want to do under the guise of the world is soon ending. Besides, some FLDS spiritual unions were unlawful in the state's eyes, and there could be no marriage licenses. All that mattered was the prophet's fulfillment of the law of God. Sad thoughts permeated my mind and put me in a somber daze. We'd been traveling north along I-15 for about an hour when our convoy pulled into a gas station in Cedar City, Utah. My hand was already on the door handle before we even slowed to a stop, and I leapt from the white Ford van as soon as Alan put it into park. Mom must have seen me through the window of Uncle Fred's Suburban and hurried after me into the restroom. Mom, I can't do this, I cried. Yes, you can. Yes, you can, she assured me, brushing the tears from my cheeks. I can't even look at the guy, let alone touch him. It will come in time, she told me. This is what we are told to do, so we have to live with it. Of course, she was trying to console me, but it was exactly what I did not want to hear. Mom walked me back to the van where Alan and his family were waiting. I was nauseated and retreated into my thoughts. I felt so empty, as if there was nothing left to feel. Over the course of the previous night, all the rage and resentment inside me have given way to pain and sorrow, and now even those emotions were gone. I had fought my fight and lost. Despite how nice Alan's parents were being and how excited his two mothers were as they sat side by side in the rear of the van chatting, it was hard for me to respond to them. Clearly, the two women had spent time primping that morning. Since women and girls of the FLDS must adhere to the strict dress codes, there is little differentiation in style between formal and casual wear. Most of the differences come from the fabrics used. Dresses for special occasions were often made of silks, satins, and fine materials. It was obvious Alan's mothers were draped in their best. We traveled nearly 140 miles when a sign announced our arrival in Caliente, Nevada. I had no reaction. I just understood. It was like arriving in hell. My fate awaited me in the Dust Bowl, translates to hot, whose name fittingly, translates to hot in English. The Hot Springs Motel was a seedy structure tucked into the side of a patchy grass and dirt hill on Nevada State Road 93, hugging the highway just as it wound into Caliente. My heart sank as I surveyed the old white stucco building with its grayish green metal roof and a small sign that read office. Alan and his parents had been talking about how some of the rooms had hot tubs. Normally, a luxury like that would have piqued my interest, but today it was the furthest thing from my mind. I couldn't believe that they could be enjoying pleasant small talk while I was about to experience the most catastrophic event in my life. Slowly, I exited the car and awaited instruction. I had heard that some of Merle Jessup's wives worked at the motel and stayed there full time, but that day Merle had sent one of his sons just to make sure everything ran smoothly. We weren't to stay long. It seemed that they wanted us to get in and get out. Some of the FLDS people came out to greet the prophet and our caravan. We were told to change clothes for the ceremonies in one of the motel rooms on the second floor. Instinct told me to run, but where? I stood frozen, not even realizing that Lily was right next to me, gathering me up to follow her and the other women inside. She knew I was suffering. Although she was only a few months older than I was, she possessed a composure I couldn't muster under the circumstances. While Lily didn't hate her husband to be like I hated mine, she too seemed to have second thoughts. Still, she had the physical and emotional resolve to guide me up the stairs alongside her. Holding my wedding dress with shaky hands, I looked into the whitewashed room and was repulsed. This was never how I'd imagined the scene of my wedding. Tossing my things onto the bed with ugly, multicolored bedspread, I burst into tears. Lily pulled me into a hug and promised that everything would be okay. She and another of my stepsisters helped get me into my wedding dress and put me together. You know, girls, I really can't do this, I announced, as Lily pinned the dainty silver tiara Cassandra had given me in my hair. I'd always imagined that my wedding day would be magical and I would be wearing a crown just like a princess of the fairy tales. And I'd read as a child, but as Lily I read as a child, but as Lily fixed the tiara to my hair, I felt nothing like a princess about to live a happily ever after. I can't go through with this, I uttered, tempted to rip the tiara from my head. Nancy was disgusted with my continued disrespect. I can't believe that you're turning down the prophet and defying God's will in your life. I just can't believe you're not being obedient, she said to me. For a moment, her words took me aback and made me think, she's right. I was defying what they told me to do, but I was also tired of her criticism. Just because I care about my life doesn't mean I'm turning down the prophet, I replied coldly. Okay, I'll tell them that, she shot back over her shoulder before marching out of the room and down the stairs. Lily and I exchanged looks and tried to comfort each other in an attempt to make me laugh. She said, "There's a back door. We could just run." For that brief moment, we sat suspended in thought, each wondering if we could really pull off an escape. Well, she said reluctantly, we better get down there. They're waiting for us. Standing in the doorway, I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself in the white shoes that my sister had bought. Alan was standing at the foot of the stairs when I finally peered out of the room to answer the repeated calls to hurry down. At that moment, all I could think was, please just die. He reached out for my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to touch him. Oh, Lisi, you're beautiful, Mom exclaimed, trying to be positive. This line, spoke by so many mothers to their daughters on countless wedding days throughout history, did nothing to comfort me or bring a smile to my face. Like Alan's mother's, mine had selected her finest dress and my favorite of hers, a gorgeous pale blue silk. Cassandra had styled Mom's long brown waves for the occasion, and even through my tears, I could see that she looked lovely. In a daze, I trailed the group to a covered patio off the main office where I waited for my ceremony to begin. I was relieved that I didn't have to go first. My eyes scanned the space around me, falling inevitably on Alan. He tried talking to me, but I kept my lips firmly sealed. Mom, I urged again, this is going to be the biggest mistake of my life. I can feel it and I know it. I didn't care that my sister Rachel was standing right there next to Mom. It pained me to see the two women with their bright smiles, even though I knew my mother's was fabricated. Just be strong, Mom said. The Lord knows what He's doing. As Mom and Rachel exchanged pleasantries, I wondered what was going on behind the doors of the small side building where one couple had been taken. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the voice of Uncle Reulin's son, Nephi, summoning me. They're ready for you, he said. They're waiting. I froze as he prominently asked, Are you coming? The wobbly feeling I always got when I've been summoned to Uncle Warren's office at Alta Academy suddenly returned tenfold, and I could barely make my legs work. The headache I had been nursing for days from all my crying grew more intense with every heavy step I took. The building where the ceremony was to take place was set off from the rest of the motel. Excuse me. It had been cleared of its bed, and a few rows of chairs had been arranged for the weddings. I could almost feel my mother worried that I might try to run, hovering right behind me as I tried to maneuver the gravely terrain, excuse me, the gravelly, girl, get the word out. Gravely. Y'all know sometimes me and these pronunciations. Terrain in my high heels and long encumbering dress. I paused in the threshold of the room to see what awaited me. Tears streamed from my eyes as I looked into its tacky pink motif. It felt foreboding and grim. A thin layer of dirt covered the bottom edges of the walls, and every corner seemed to hide unfamiliar shadows. There were three short rows of seats for the wedding, two rows with three seats each, and one with two. The two seats at the front were for Alan and me. My mother sat in the middle row, alone with Alan's two mothers and his father directly behind her. Her face didn't offer me much comfort, but I was glad to see she was there. The prophet was at the center of the room, sitting in a big lazy boy, like the one Uncle Fred had in his living room. Uncle Rulin had the two next most powerful FLDS men on either side of him. Uncle Fred, serving as my father, sat to his left. Uncle Warren was on his right, signifying his role as Uncle Rulin's right hand man. While the prophet was just a few feet from where I was standing, I felt unsure I could walk the short distance to shake his hand, as was customary. I felt Uncle Warren's icy stare egging me on, and despite my urge to turn and flee, I managed to make my way over and greet them. Everyone was watching me as I moved from Uncle Rulin's outstretched hand to Uncle Warren's to Uncle Fred's. Uncle Warren directed Alan and me to take our places in the front two seats. Feeling overwhelmed, I obeyed. After about a minute, Warren stood to receive the power to conduct our wedding from his father, who had authorized him to seal us in his name. Because none of this is about ruling. All of this is about Warren and what he wanted. And I just hate that he kept using his desires and masking them as the guise of his father. And here's the thing, his father is no better, but if you're going to do it, own it. He began reading passages from Enlightened Truth, raising children in the family order of heaven. As he droned on, my mind raced, but Uncle Warren's stern directive startled me back to the present. Can we please have you stand? He instructed, looking out over his glasses at me. I heard what he had said, but I remained paralyzed in my seat. So will you please stand to take each other's hands? Uncle Warren continued. Rising, I said, Can't I just stand here? The plea was ignored, and Alan took my limp hand in what is known as the patriarchal grip as Uncle Warren began the ceremony. What is a patriarchal grip? Does that mean he squeezed her hand, or does it just mean he touched her? This is annoying. I'm so, ugh. As Uncle Warren began the ceremony, I felt dizzy, like I might pass out. I knew that I should be paying attention to these sacred words, but I couldn't focus on them. My mind was still searching for an exit. Do you, Brother Alan Gladesteed, take Sister Elisa, I said it right first, Jessup by thy right hand and receive her unto yourself to be your lawful and wedded wife? Just like at my mother's wedding to Uncle Fred, I held my breath and desperately prayed that Uncle Warren would not seal me for time and all eternity, and you to be her lawful and wedded husband. I was praying that God would at least do this for me, that he wouldn't let Warren say those words, that he would let me be with someone else in heaven for time and all eternity. My heart dropped, and tears slid down my face. From this moment forward, my entire life would feel wrong. Even in death, I'd be miserable. I wanted to run as Uncle Warren droned on with the vows, with a covenant and promise on your part that you will fulfill all the laws, rights, and ordinances pertaining to this holy bond of matrimony in the new and everlasting covenant, doing this in the presence of God, angels, and these witnesses of your own free will and choice. Alan agreed promptly. I do. It's not free will, though. It's a lie. So even in this, it's all a lie. I could feel Uncle Warren's piercing gaze turn in my direction, and my heart began to race. Do you, Sister Elisa Jessup, take Brother Alan Gladesteed by the right hand and give yourself to him? I was no longer hearing his words, for my mind was a jumble. Give myself to Alan? No, oh, please, God, no. My mind was screaming. I tried to focus on the words being said, of your own free will and choice. He finished, waiting for my reply. My free will and choice? I thought, nothing about this day was my free will and choice. For the past week, I had desperately tried to tell the very man saying these words that I did not want this and had begged him to allow me to grow up first. He, more than anyone else, knew that this was not my free will and choice. I couldn't say it. I felt the room fall silent as the words failed to find their way to my lips. Uncle Warren's stern gaze drilled a hole through me, and he looked so intimidating and powerful. I could feel everyone's stares as I stood there speechless. Time seemed to stand still as I searched the room for an answer. My gaze finally fell upon my mother, whose look of terrified agony said it all. If I denied myself and my family this moment, I would be going against everything that mattered to us. An overwhelming sense of defeat fell over me. As hard as I fought it, it was all over now. Warren's voice broke the silence. Would the mother of the bride please stand and give her support? Meaning, grab her hand, bring her back to reality, and make her say yes or else. It's just threat after threat after threat in what doesn't seem like a threat, but it's clearly one. Mom stood, grabbing my left hand. I could feel her hand trembling as she held mine. Stealing a look at her face, I could see that she was holding back tears. Do you, Sister Elisa, take Brother Alan by the right hand and give yourself to him to be his lawful and wedded wife for time and all eternity? Warren repeated in a voice that made the question sound like a command. Even as the silence grew unbearable, I still couldn't bring myself to formulate the words. Suddenly, I felt my fingers being crushed by my mom's death grip. It shocked me into the moment, reminding me that I had no choice but to respond. Okay, I said, almost in a whisper. I do. I could hear the collective sigh of relief rise up in the room. It was as if they'd all been holding their breaths in anticipation of what I was going to say and were seemingly thankful that I had finally broke. Oh, that I had finally broken. In other words, they're breathing a sigh of relief because they were finally able to get this girl to do what it is that they wanted her to do, which is break her into marriage. It's sad. In the last few moments, I had teetered on the edge of heaven and hell and ultimately had been forced to choose heaven. But for me, the bride, no, the brittle had been cinched tight and heaven would be my hell. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the authority of the holy priesthood, I pronounce you legally and lawfully husband and wife for time and all eternity. My soul was broken. I was now going to be Alan's wife for eternity, and there was nothing I could do about it. You may kiss the bride, Uncle Warren directed. Reflexively, I backed away as Alan leaned in to kiss me. The tears were falling freely, and I had to keep my shoulders from shaking. I lowered my head and shook it. Please don't make me do this, I pleaded in my mind. Uncle Warren looked at me pointedly, almost hissing the words, "Kiss Alan." All I could think of was the time in elementary school when Uncle Warren told me that I was to treat boys as poisonous snakes. I would have said, "Isn't he a poisonous snake?" The way I would have went, like, but here's the thing. She's so defeated in this moment that she can't even do that. Everything about her being has been screaming no from even before she found out that this was going to be her husband. And now here she is, married to this man and still being forced to do things that she doesn't want to do. To me, Alan was worse than that, and I could not bring myself to kiss him. Finally, I gave him a peck. Excuse me. Finally, I gave in and pecked him on the lips. I was desperate to escape. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to leave and was stopped when someone tugged on my hand. At that moment, Uncle Warren took my hand and Alan's, putting them together in his saying, "Now go forth and multiply and replenish the earth with good priesthood children." She is 14 years old. Her body is not ready to do all of that. And here you are forcing this upon her little body. Up until this point, she hadn't even been kissed. You removed her from school. Well, all of y'all did. Removed Fred or whoever, removed her from school just for being friends with the boy. And here she is, her first interaction, go multiply. Multiplying would be the last thing on my mind. I could barely see through my tears as I fled. I escaped into a separate room and dissolved. My mother followed me and I ran from her, locking myself in a bathroom, crumbling to the floor. I was overtaken by sobs. I couldn't believe it. I had just gotten married. Immediately, I could hear her soothing voice through the grain of the wooden door between us, almost begging, Lacey, please let me in. Mom was joined by my sister Rachel and Alan, who also tried unsuccessfully to get me to come out. She don't want to see that man. She just ran off. Why are you coming to the room with him? I had been there for several minutes when I heard a knock and a voice of one of the church elders, Uncle Wendell Nilsson. I'd always liked Uncle Wendell and felt guilty and embarrassed that I was now avoiding him. "I just want to be the first to congratulate the new Mrs. Steed," Uncle Wendell told me when I finally opened the bathroom door. I found momentary solace in his bear hug. "You know things will look up. Just remember to trust God." He tried to cheer me up, saying that I would reap the rewards of obedience to the prophet. "Someday thousands will flock to hear your story of faith and courage." His words were kind and meant to be encouraging, but I didn't want my forced obedience to be an example to anyone. Both he and my mother tried to encourage me by reminding me that for a woman to take part in a spiritual marriage was the highest achievement she could reach. It's just so full of the highest achievement you can reach is by getting married to a man. Like, that's all women have to offer. If you get married to a man, oh, and if you give that man babies, you're right on track. Come on. To them, I had been honored with this wonderful blessing. After I came out of the bathroom, I was directed to go with the other brides to change for the luncheon. I had a hard time sitting next to Alan at the table. All through the lunch, I could barely think, let alone eat. I was only 10 minutes into it, and already my marriage was a nightmare. And that is where we're going to end. Y'all, this is a hot mess. A hot mess express. And I can't begin to imagine how heartbreaking this all has to be for her. It's just wrong on so many levels. Anyways, you guys, let me know your thoughts on this chapter. Like, how are we feeling even about her mom's decision to encourage her daughter to do this? And I get the aspect about it, But I just wonder, I often find myself when I'm reading these stories, especially with this one with her being so young, I can't imagine me encouraging my son at 14 to get married. But this goes back to, this is what they're being taught, which is why in any religion, in my opinion, you have to do your own research to determine what what is true. Because a lot of this, if some of them did some more reading, they would see a lot of what they were told was false. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, that's all I got. Let me know your thoughts on this reading. Please like the video as it helps the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, peace.